When we think of danger out in the wild, we usually picture big predators, right? But what if I told you some of the biggest mysteries, the most surprising secrets, are hiding inside some of the world's smallest creatures? Today, we're heading to the wetlands of Australia to unravel a scientific detective story, one that all takes place inside the body of a tiny tick.
And it all boils down to this one really critical question. What dangerous secrets can a single tick actually carry? I mean, we all know ticks can transmit diseases. But in a place as unique as Australia, with its own incredible ecosystems, scientists know surprisingly little about what's really living inside the local tick population.
So to get those answers, a team of researchers went deep into Jukman National Park in Fog Dam Reserve. We're talking Australia's Northern Territory. These incredible wetlands just teeming with wildlife, well, they became the scene of the crime, so to speak.
Now, every good detective story needs its suspects, right? And in this case, the scientists had two main bacterial families on their radar. Both of them are known for being pretty nasty when it comes to human and animal health.
Okay, meet suspect number 1, a family of bacteria called Rickettsia. Now, within this big family, the scientists were zeroing in on a specific branch called the spotted fever group. And this group is, well, it's infamous. It's known all over the world for causing some really serious tick-borne diseases in people. So, figuring out if these guys were in Australian ticks, yeah, that was a top priority.
And then we have suspect number 2, Francisella. And with this one, the stakes get way, way higher. See, this family includes the bacterium that causes tularemia, a disease so infectious that the CDC actually lists it as a Category A bioterrorism agent. I mean, we're talking top-tier threat. Finding this in Australia would be a massive, massive deal.
So, with their suspects lined up, the scientists needed evidence. And to get that evidence, they couldn't just look for the ticks themselves. Nope, they had to hunt down the animals the ticks were feeding on. It was time to head back into the wetlands and find some key witnesses.
And here they are, our witnesses. The team collected a total of 252 ticks from these 5 reptile species. Yellow-spotted monitors, water pythons, green tree snakes, blue-tongued lizards, and even frilled neck lizards. These animals were the carriers, the source of all the clues the scientists needed. So how in the world do you get a confession from a tick? Well, it's a pretty cool 4-step forensic process. First, you collect the ticks from the animals. Then, back in the lab, you extract all the DNA from inside them. Step 3 is the real magic. They use a technique called PCR, which is basically a genetic photocopier. It makes millions and millions of copies of any bacterial DNA they find. And finally, they sequence that DNA, reading it like a unique genetic barcode to get a positive ID on our suspect.
And after all that painstaking work in the lab, the evidence started to pour in. And the first big break in the case? It came from suspect number 1, Rickettsia.
The results are pretty shocking, actually. A whopping 34.3%, that's more than a third, of the main tick species they looked at, called Amblyomma fimbriatum, tested positive for DNA from that spotted fever group Rickettsia. So there was no question about it. The suspect was definitely at the scene.
But which Rickettsia was it exactly? To figure that out, they built this, a genetic family tree. You can think of it like a police lineup of known criminals, where the closer the branch is, the closer the relatives. They took their sample's genetic barcode, compared it to all the others, and boom, the result was clear. The bacteria they found was a super close relative of a species called Rickettsia tamurae, which had been found in Asia before. A whole new branch on the family tree had just been discovered, right there in Australia.
But then, just when they thought they were getting a handle on the case, the investigation took a wild, unexpected turn. While they were busy looking for Rickettsia, the scientists stumbled onto a clue they weren't even looking for, a clue that pointed straight to their second and much more dangerous suspect, Francisella.
This is honestly my favorite part of any scientific discovery, the happy accident. The researchers put it right there in their paper. They found the Francisella DNA completely by chance while they were running their other tests. It literally just popped up in the results, totally uninvited.
And this wasn't just some small find. This was a landmark moment. It was the very first time anyone had ever found Francisella DNA in a tick on the entire continent of Australia. So the big question hanging in the air was, had they just found the dangerous bioterror agent, or was it something else entirely?
So once again, they turned to a genetic family tree to solve the mystery. On this chart, you can see all the known dangerous strains of Francisella, like the one that causes tularemia,
They're all clustered together up at the top. Down at the bottom, you have all these other harmless versions, bacteria that just live peacefully inside ticks. The question was, where would the Australian sample land?
And here it is, the verdict. The Australian Francisella did not group with the dangerous pathogens. Instead, it landed squarely with the other known harmless tick-associated bacteria from North America. It was a relative, for sure, but not the killer they were worried about finding. You can just imagine the huge sigh of relief.
So, the verdicts are in on our two main suspects. One is a new dot on the map of potential pathogens, and the other turned out to be a harmless cousin of a major threat. But this case isn't closed. So what does all of this really mean in the big picture?
All right, let's break it down. What are the key takeaways here? First, this is the first time scientists have ever found evidence of both Rickettsia and Francisella in this specific Australian tick. Huge. Second, that Rickettsia they found, that puts a new potential pathogen on the map for health officials in Australia to keep an eye on. Third, that surprise Francisella discovery was a real cliffhanger that ended with good news, a harmless relative, not the big bad bioterror agent. And finally, this whole story is just a powerful reminder that science is all about discovery, and it often leads you to answers you weren't even looking for.
And that kind of leaves us with one final fascinating thought, doesn't it? This whole incredible detective story started just by looking at a tiny tick on the back of a lizard. It really makes you wonder, what other microbial secrets are hiding out there, in plain sight, just waiting for the right scientist to come along and crack the case?